In this video I'm going to talk about how to remove the valve covers. You may need to remove the valve cover gaskets which live on the underside here and replace those because of leaks, or you may need to get access to the inside of the head. But to get these things off requires a little bit of effort. You'll need to, depending on whether or not you're removing both or just one on the one side, but at least the exhaust on the side that you are removing at the rear, you'll need to remove the exhaust manifold. There's a bracket that sits underneath here that you don't have to remove, but it's going to give you a bunch more room that holds onto the exhaust manifold. Just two screws that take 23 Newton meters, you can remove that. The coils need to be removed, so the single screw for each of those plus the electrical connection, just pop all of those out. The connection point to the valve lift solenoid lives in there, so just disconnect that connection. The solenoid itself can stay in place. Also disconnect the camshaft position sensor connection. That again can stay in place because that just comes out with the cover. Then you'll need to remove a couple of other things. Specifically for the coils, there are ground straps. There is pretty obvious wires that are just screwed to two different positions. There's you can see the center, or the front and center coils have a single ground strap, and there's another one here for the rearward one. That will need to be removed. And then at the top there is the wiring harness plastic casing that you'll need to get access to by removing the top engine cover on, because this is the right hand side here. On the right hand side there are two screws there that need to be removed. On the left hand side there's only a single one at the front, and then there's just a clip at the back here, so they just get pulled off. And then you can pull those up and out of the way, fold all of the wires up so everything's nice and clear. And then before you open everything up, I would suggest, because there's going to be lots of debris and everything sitting along the top here especially, is get some compressed air in here and blow everything clear, because anything that's along this seam line, the moment you open this up, your intake cam is sitting directly below that seam, and then anything that's just going to fall down onto it. So you don't want that to happen. So we need to have everything nice and clean. And then there's a few things on each side that need to be removed. And I'll go through those individually on each side. Specifically at the front, so on the right hand side you've got some pipes and a little piece of ducting out the front here that goes to the air oil separator. And on the left hand side here you've got a few things for the vacuum pump, and the high pressure fuel line has a connection there. So we just need to disconnect those, move those out of the way. And then once you're happy that all those items are clear, and we can now start releasing the screws. There are 20 screws on each side. Some of them are really difficult to see. So you'll be putting your hands around here by feel at the top. I found access to these was definitely easiest from underneath, rather than trying to get in from the top and just feeling around here with a T30 for all the screws that go on here. So releasing from the outside in, remove all of those. The thing will still be really stuck to it. And then what you're going to do is, there's these tabs at the bottom here, and I'll show you this in a moment, where you can just get a piece of timber and a hammer and just give these a bit of a whack, and then they'll pop off. Big thing is making sure obviously that you get all 20 screws. So the way I did that was, when I thought I'd got them all, I just went and counted all the screws to make sure that I had 20 for each side, and that ensured that I wasn't trying to whack this off with screws still in place, because this thing's pretty tight even when all the screws are removed, and it's a bit difficult to know if the screws are actually removed or not. And then once you pull this off, the gasket itself, this in a lot of places was still stuck to the head, so getting it off was a bit of a pain. On the left hand side here, because that bank is pushed a little bit further forward, this is easier because it's this back corner here. So back top on the right here especially is particularly difficult to get access to these screws at the top here, and that one there on the left was a bit hard. So there's not much room there, and whilst you're trying to manhandle it to disconnect the seal that's connected, that's still stuck to everything, it's a bit of a pain. So you'll need to make sure that all the screws are out, have both hands clear, maybe even have a second person to get their hands in underneath here and pull off all the seals, because it just makes it a little bit difficult. Something that you may want to consider doing, there's a bracket that lives there with two M8 screws that take 23 Newton meters. That's the one that screws into the bottom of the exhaust manifold. I just found that that gave me a bit more room to get the valve cover out. Here's a bit of a look when the valve cover is off. This is on the right hand side. You can see the variable valve lift solenoid lives in there. Before you pull everything off, like I said before, where you'd want to use compressor to blow around the top, get in here and blow around here because there's a lot of crud in here. And the problem is that the moment you try and clean that out, it's going to fall down on here. So before you pull the valve cover off or remove anything from here, give that a good blowout. Other points of interest, you can see the exhaust cam along the bottom is just a single timing, whereas the ones at the top here, we've got the variable valve lifters, and it's really interesting to see just how different the cam profile is, how much shorter the duration is for the small valve lift than the large. It seems to be open for far longer on the large valve lift. Interesting. To replace the gasket is a pretty simple process of just pulling this thing out, cleaning everything up, putting the new one in there, pressing it into place, and then reinstalling. Something that's a little bit interesting, I'm not sure if you noticed, but on the valve covers, there's a channel that runs along here which is completely separate from the rest of it. And what seems to happen is you can sort of get your finger and go in behind there. There seems to be a channel that runs along here. So all the oil that's coming out of the head runs into a channel behind here that all runs into this hole here, which is at the rear. And it's the same on both sides. And then that runs forward to that channel there, and that's where everything goes in to the scavenge pumps to then be pumped around the engine. Why it's like that? I guess my guess is maybe they allow it to do that so everything settles down here a little bit first and defrosts before it then runs down here and gets sucked back into the oil pump maybe. Who knows? Some of the spots where you need to get a Torx driver in to remove some of the screws on the valve covers are really difficult. So the upper rear are the worst places, especially on the right hand side. This is the tool that I use. This is just a little Torx driver and a little ratchet like that, which is great to get things off, and that was only just big enough to get in there, but I'm not going to be able to get a torque wrench in there. So this is what I'm using to put this on. It's the same tool with a little 1/4 inch spanner attached to it. That's 19 centimeters long, and when you do the maths, 13 Newton meters, which is about 1.3 kilos at a meter, which turns out to be about 7 kilos at that 19 centimeters. So if I put this on, apply 7 kilograms with my luggage scales, that should be exactly 13 Newton meters. Specific things about the right bank. There is the air oil separator hose that comes from here. That seal there just pulls straight off. There's 2 screws there. They're a little bit hard to see, so I found they sort of just going in from up below and sort of feeling around here to remove those was the best way. And then there's this one down here which sits about there that also needs to be removed. And then this thing needs to be pulled out, which is actually harder than it seems. This seal here, which is just a profile seal, will just sit against it and that'll pop up, whereas this thing's really jammed inside the head, and what you'll need to do, I found, is to lever that out. And from the front, so if you remove the front engine cover, you can get a tool in and lever it out from underneath here. Just be careful, there are some high pressure fuel lines here. I put a piece of timber down to support it against the head so I didn't hit the high pressure fuel lines, and then was able to lever that up. And once it sort of gets and pops out, it's still a bit hard. Then I found that just getting in from underneath and both my hands under here and wiggling this out, and then it eventually came out. But that was actually a bit of a pain to get out. Hopefully you'll be able to see this, but from the front there, that in there is that piece of plastic conduit with the big O-ring around it that goes into the valve cover and goes to the air oil separator. So what I did was, after removing all 3 screws, that big O-ring is just in there at the end of my finger, and I levered underneath there where my finger is, and I put a piece of timber about there somewhere so I didn't put pressure on these high pressure fuel pump hoses, so I could lever that off with a rivet removal tool or a screwdriver or something like that to get that clear, and then that will come out. On the right hand side, to get the harness clear, the bolts that go all the way down on the head down here, there are 2 of them, front and rear, so remove those. They take 23 Newton meters, they're M8. In addition to that, I found it helped if I removed the ones here on the back of each head, so this thing could actually move a little bit more easily. And then I was able to pull this thing all the way up and then just strap it up here. So now it's well clear of everything down the bottom. Looking towards the front, right up the top here, you can see I've grabbed hold of that harness and pulled it all the way up, so all of the coil connections and all the other connections are completely clear, which makes it much easier to get access in here. And as you can see, there is a lot of room to put the cover in at the front, just not much at the rear. This stud here and a couple of these plugs, there's one there and there's another one I've folded up underneath the brake line there to get it out of the way, that get pushed over the top of these like that. So get a screwdriver in here and lever those out and push those up the top here, especially this one up the front here. You can sort of just jam it behind the brake line because it really gets in the way there. There's still not much room in here to get this cover out. So what I find is, you can see this is where the 16 is here. It's going to run down the side there as it comes off. At the other end, there's no problems at all. There's plenty of room. So what you need to do is sort of put it hard at the front against the wall, slot it up there. I'm not sure if you can see up there, that stud just slotting in there like that, and then I can move it forward and into place. When I'm pulling it off, if I just pull it off and do that, it just hits it and it just gets jammed in place. And especially when the gasket is all stuck up inside here, that was a real pain to get off. But the key to getting it out is to move it out, then move it rearward a little bit so it just slots down the forward part of that bit in there, and then the thing will come out quite easily. On the left bank, things that additionally you need to do, you've got the pipe here, which is that one there from the vacuum pump. It goes in that direction there, so to remove it you need to push it out. Prior to removing it, you need to, there's a screw there which is up in there. There is that connecting point there which is into the side of the valve cover, so that needs to be removed. This connection point here, there's just a squeeze and pull that out. There's a clip there which holds one of these lines. You can just unclip that, and then you'll need to push this forward like that, and then you can push this towards the center of the car to remove that. You can remove the pipe if you like, but you don't need to. That can just sit there like that. If that's all a bit confusing, have a look at the vacuum pump video that I did. That'll show that all in a little bit more detail. In addition to that, you've got the hard fuel pipe here that goes to the high pressure fuel pump. Up the top up here, and it's a bit difficult to see, there is a bracket that has a rubber grommet that holds around the pipe. That has a screw in it that goes into the valve cover. You'll need to remove that and then rotate that bracket towards the front and out of the way so the valve cover can come out. And then before you try and either remove or install, just make sure all of these hoses and everything are pushed out of the way so the valve cover can come out this way. Apart from that, on the left hand side, it's relatively simple because there's much more room than on the right. On the left, to get good access, because these pipes sit over the top of this, what I did Have a look at your coolant level, and if it's not right up the top here, you can quite happily remove these hoses and just pull these out of the way. So they're just a squeeze. That one's just got a single squeeze, that one's got one on each side, and they just pop off the valve there. You can unclip that one out of these. This one can sort of just go around the side there. In addition to that, the air oil separator hose that runs around the side here, I also just completely remove that. That would normally join there and there. There's just a squeeze to remove. And now you can get your hands down in here a little bit better. For the harness conduit here that needs to be disconnected, there is a single screw at the front, that's M8, that takes 23 Newton meters, and at the back here there is a single sort of clip that clips into the top of the head. So you just pull that up and out, and then we can pull all this up and out of the way like this, and then that is well clear of the valve cover below.